So our next project is a coil built project, and we'll talk about what we're creating in just a minute. But previously, we were talking about slab building, making impressions, and we're going to get to know a few more techniques on how to design the outside surface of a clay creation. We're also going to be talking about how to construct an or a object using just coils. So we used a lot of these tools last class, and I want to just go over and put names to the tools, to images of the tools, so you know exactly what I'm talking about when I'm asking you to use a specific tool in class. So we have the wire cutter, the modeling tool, the needle tool here in green, the sponge, and the rib tool. These are all tools you should become familiar with because we will be using these throughout the remainder of our clay unit. The new tool that we are using that is new to this project is the banding wheel. What the banding wheel does is it spins on its axis, so you can have a round surface or a round spinning surface that allows you to create circular objects like vases or cylinders, whatever you're looking to create. Now, let's talk a little bit about what clay is. I didn't really tell you what clay was in the previous project, and clay is just a form of wettened dirt. It's eroded material that it comes from eroded rocks. The origins of clay is, this is what's cool about clay, is this is a tool that ever since we've learned how to control fire, we've been able to create pottery pretty much. So this is something that has been used throughout decades and decades of practice and art form. Now remember, we talked about all of the different aspects of clay and the different variables, and what's really important to remember here is that when clay is fired, it has a bit of moisture before it's fired. When you fire it though, the heat, it shrinks it and it creates it a little bit smaller than what you anticipate it to be. So whatever you create at a certain height will shrink a little bit. But also when you fire it, it becomes hardened and then it becomes fragile. So you'll have to remember that also as soon as your piece is fired or as soon as it dries out, there is a chance that it's easier to break. So the journey of clay, what does it look like? Well, we work on it mostly when it's leather hard. And then once it turns into greenware, or once it dries out completely, then you throw it in the kiln. You don't throw it, you delicately place it in the kiln. You set it to a temperature, and then you bisque fire it. And that's what bisqueware is. That is fired clay from its original form without any glaze on it. Then you apply the glaze, and then you put it back in the kiln, and then you finally get your final ceramics piece. So there is quite a few steps to the process of firing clay. So last project we focused on the slab building portion, which is seen in the top right hand corner of this slide. This project we're going to focus on coil building, which is seen at the bottom right hand or bottom left hand corner of this slide. So remember, we're working in coil building. Again, project shrink. I'm going to ask you to build to a certain height in this project, and you're going to have to build past that height because when it fires, that clay will shrink ever so slightly, and you want to make sure you're still exceeding the expected guidelines. There's the 10 rules of clay, which I'm not going to go over because we've gone over them last class, but revisit them if you don't remember. Now you might be curious, what are we coil building? I said I'd get to that at the start of this slide, or this slideshow. Our second project is going to be to create a flower vase. The vase is going to be 100% coil built, and if you're not sure what that means, you can see this image on the right as an example of what coil building is. It's when you roll coils and then you stack them on top of each other and then you blend them together to create a cylinder or a vase-like project. You're going to be required to explore all three of these processes or techniques in your coil built pot, and we're going to learn about those further on in this PowerPoint. The first one is going to be piercing, the second one is going to be applique, and the third one is going to be incising. Again, I'll repeat that. You need to remember to incorporate all three of these techniques in your vase at the end. So coil building, I gave you a brief explanation, but it's when you use coils, and you see that more clearly on the bottom right. You can see on the inside the coils are seen on the inside, but we've blended them on the outside. For you guys, that's all I'm going to be expecting, is that you coil build and then you smooth the outside surface. In this video, I just wanted to share with you the process of coil building. Now we're going to use a bit different technique than this guy is using. He's using multiple coils for each layer. We're just going to use one coil per each layer, but you can see how he takes the project and he blends it onto the vase. And if you look below the coil that he's working with, you can see how flat and how even you can get your ceramic vase or bowl. So this is the process of how to coil build a pot. So piercing is one of those three techniques I was asking you to incorporate in your design. Piercing is when you cut all the way through the outside surface of your ceramic vase. There's a lot of cool techniques that you can do or create using this technique. You can pierce designs. There's all sorts of stuff, but you're going to have to incorporate some of this piercing technique into your project. Applique is applying thin slabs or coils into a pot to create a raised surface. So you can see how these flowers were added to the surface of the pot after it was built. Here's a good example of different ways to create applique. You can do it with small intricate designs, or you could use coils to create raised edges. Now incising is the last thing. We've already learned what incising is. I just used a different term for it. I use the term impressions. You can either create cuts into your surface without going all the way through the surface, or you can make impressions into the clay. So here's one example of creating deep cuts into your surface. Here's some examples of not only creating cuts, but also creating impressions of objects. If you go on to take Ceramics 1, you'll have the opportunity to try out these three things, which we won't get to in our classroom or in Art 1. You're going to get to explore wheel throwing. You're going to get to explore sculpting, and you're also going to get to explore pinching. So before we begin designing your vases or creating your vases out of clay, we have to plan. And your design has to be inspired from exotic places around the world. So what I want you to do is I want you to begin Googling different exotic locations and plants in their area. You have to list at least 6 of these. So again, I want you to Google different exotic plants from different locations, and I want you to have at least 6 of those listed in those 6 lines. After you have listed and Googled 6 exotic plants from exotic places from around the world, you want to select 3 of those exotic plants. I chose the jellyfish air plant for my concept number 1. I chose the spider flower for concept number 2, and I chose the pitcher plant for concept number 3. I then created 3 different designs for each plant that uses some of the things I was seeing on those plants to inspire how I created my applique or my piercing designs into the pot. I ended up going with concept number 3, but I want you to notice how I have really explored a variety of different ways to uh, of the shape of my vase. So not every vase is the same shape. Traditionally, we think of vases more like this third concept, with the contour being very similar to what a vase looks like. But you are not restricted from exploring maybe a round vase or an oval vase, or maybe you want to go with like a square vase. That's going to be up to you. So draw out 3 unique concepts inspired by 3 different plants that you chose. As it says here, be as descriptive as you can in your drawings. Draw the shape of the pot and the 3 added techniques: piercing, applique, and incising. On mine, you'll notice I have piercing and applique. The dark holes are where I have holes in my project. The applique is where you're seeing things coming off of the pot itself. Um, so like some of those flower or leaf type objects popping off of the pot. The one thing that I missed and that I would get downgraded for is that I didn't show where or how I would have incising in my piece.
Hey everyone, and because I'm not the best ceramicist, I'm going to have Mrs. Negus, who is also a ceramics teacher alongside an art metals teacher, show us the process of building a coil pot from the base up. What I've prepared for Mrs. Negus and what you'll need to prepare for yourselves in the very beginning of this project is you'll have to roll yourself a slab. We remember how to do this from our previous project. If you don't, you can always revisit that previous project, or I can link it in the classroom if you'd like. So you have to prepare for yourself a slab, and you're gonna have to roll a couple coils. If you don't remember how to roll coils, that's okay. Mrs. Negus is gonna go through the process of rolling coils because she's very good at it. So, without further ado, let's jump to Mrs. Negus.
Oh, hi there. I'm Mrs. Negus, and I'm going to show you how to roll a coil. So I like to start with about a fistful of clay, a little bit more maybe. And I like to start by just squishing it in my hands to create kind of this caterpillar shape, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I'm just going to squeeze it out. And then the way I like to roll coils is I like to use just this part of my hand. I don't use my palm, because when I use my palm, I push too hard and I get flat spots. So if I use just this part of my hand, I end up not getting those flat spots. I also use my hands spread apart, okay? It's important to stand during this. So like I said, my fingers are separated and I'm not going anywhere to my palm. I'm just using my fingers here. Every once in a while, I like to take it and kind of twist it. That'll prevent you from having flat spots. And I'm gonna roll till I have a coil that's about the thickness of my pinky. Now, that changes if you're someone who has large hands, okay? But about the thickness of my pinky should be good. And there you have it, a beautiful coil. All right, so we're gonna be making a pot out of the banding wheel. And the way we have to start is we have to have our banding wheel, but we have to start with a slab on the bottom, okay? So I'm gonna take this slab, and the easiest way to get a nice clean circle on the bottom is I just take my water cup, I set it here, I grab a needle tool, and I'm just gonna trace and cut myself out a nice circle. Now I want you to notice I didn't take the cup and just push it down like a cookie cutter, because then it tends to get stuck. So I didn't want to do that. So here's my beautiful circle, okay? In order to get this stuck on here so it doesn't fly off, I'm gonna score and slip it, okay? So you're gonna see it again. I'm gonna take my needle tool, and I'm not gonna be scared to score it, okay? Don't be really gentle about it, because then it's not gonna stay very good. I'm gonna score it. I'm gonna take a little bit of water, put it on the banding wheel. And now what I want to do is I want to use the circles on the banding wheel to help me to know where the center is. Okay, so I'm going to gently set it on here. And I'm going to use those circles and I'm going to spin it to try to get it as much in the center as I can. Once it's like that, you're just going to push it down. And now that's going to be stuck in place for you. Once you have the base of your coil pot, your slab, stuck to that banding wheel, you're going to start adding your coils, okay? And we're going to use the banding wheel to our advantage. So we first want to score and slip those on here. So I'm going to spin with my left hand. I'm right-handed. I'm going to spin with my left hand, and I'm going to score. And again, I'm not being too light-handed. I'm going to score just around the edges of that slab. From there, I'm going to take my sponge. I'm going to add a little bit of water. I added too much. You can see that it spun off. That's okay. And then I'm going to take my coil. Now what I want to do is I want to match this coil up as much as even to the outside as I can. And you'll see that it's overlapping here. That's good, okay? I want to make sure I'm keeping it close to the edge because then it'll be easier to blend. Now where these two meet, I'm going to cut in between them, and I'm going to cut it at a diagonal so that it has a good surface area to keep it close together. So I'm going to take those extra pieces off, and now I'm going to take this coil off, and I'm going to score both edges. I'm going to slip, just going to use my finger, add a little bit of water, put those together, and I'm going to blend. So score, slip, blend. I'm going to blend that to make this an O, an onion ring, however you want to identify it. It doesn't have to be the best blending job ever, but you want it to stick together. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it back on my slab, and I'm going to gently press it down, but I'm going to use enough force that it's going to kind of stay in that spot without having to do any more, okay? You'll notice I didn't score the coil. You don't need to. It gets too hard to score the coil. So if I do a good enough job scoring that slab, I don't have to score the coil. All right, I have one coil on. We're gonna repeat that process. So again, I'm gonna spin it, scoring that top coil. I'm gonna wait on the slip. I'm gonna take my next coil. Okay, this one's just a little bit short. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna move my project out of the way, make sure you can still see. And I'm just gonna roll a little bit more so that I just have a little bit that overlaps. I'm gonna check it again. Now I've got that little bit that overlaps. Again, I'm gonna make sure it's sitting close to the outside on all sides. I'm overlapping it. I'm gonna cut where they meet, and I'm gonna cut at a diagonal. Take the extra pieces out. Score and slip the edges together, not being too gentle. We really want to score it. Slip it, take a little water on my finger, and blend. Score, slip, blend. And now I have my onion ring. I just need to add slip to my previous coil and add this on. Again, I'm going to gently press it down to make sure it's not moving on me. It's going to get rid of any little air pockets that are happening in between, and it's really going to push these two pieces of clay together where I've scored it. Okay, you might be wondering, what if I want my pot to go inward, or what if I want my pot, the form of it, to come outward? It all depends on where you place your coils. So I'm going to do this next one, and let's say that I want my pot to go inwards, okay? I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to score. I'm going to grab my coil. I'm going to see I need a little bit more, so I'm going to roll it just a little bit to give me that little bit of an overlap. You always want an overlap to make sure that coil fits perfectly. And now when I'm putting my coil on, instead of making sure it's matching the edges, I'm going to push it in just a little bit further. So instead of sitting right on this edge, I'm pushing it inward so it's half on the coil before, half off the coil before. So my little onion ring's a little bit smaller than the others. I'm gonna take my time and make sure it's sitting in a really good place. I'm gonna cut where they overlap. Take out the extra. There's a piece of hair in there. Sometimes you find hair in your clay. I'm gonna score. I'm gonna add some slip. And I'm gonna blend. So once you have about 3 coils on, you're gonna start blending. The goal of this is to not be able to see that you started with coils. We wanna make it look like you made it on the potter's wheel. So I'm gonna start by scoring the outside. So I'm gonna take my needle tool, I'm gonna use my left hand to spin the banding wheel, and I'm gonna score the entire outside. So through all of those coils, I'm gonna score. Okay, I'm not being gentle about it. You wanna make sure that you're really using a little bit of pressure, and I'm scoring just the outside. The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take some water and we're going to add some slip. So score, slip, and now we're gonna blend. I'm gonna use my palette knife to blend. Now again, I'm gonna use my left hand to spin the banding wheel. I'm gonna stabilize my right hand I use my leg and I use the table in front of me so that I can keep this as steady as possible. I'm gonna hold my palette knife by the knife portion. I'm not using the handle, but by the knife portion. And I'm gonna use the tip of it to just blend all of this together.